They were not confused that their God had any responsibility, authority, or meaning to somebody down the road, round the corner, and across the water. Those people had their own God that sat at the center of their own city square that had meaning for them. And so it was that the ancient peoples were very clear. I've got my God, you've got your God. You know, as long as we stay out of each other's way, everything's cool. But then the notion of monotheism. Now, we all grew up thinking monotheism was the greatest thing since sliced bread. But when we think of what happens when one people insist that their understanding of God is the only allowable, meaningful understanding of God, then monotheism becomes a very dangerous ideology. But more about that in part 2. So let's look again how this notion that the God that sits at the city square, that grounds the community into that gives the community its foundation and identity, has in fact persisted. So much so in our country that we can have a United States general declare that victory for the United States is assured. Why? Because my God is bigger than your God. Things haven't changed so much in 10,000 years. Finally, words. Words are, in fact, one of the things that distinguishes us from the animals. Words are what allow us to express the self-reflection that our minds, our brains engage in. So Cupid submits that the supernatural world of religion is a metaphorical, a mythical representation of the world of language. In other words, we use words to construct and represent or represent our world. We build our world out of words. Religion is the word system that we use collectively to explain and therefore predict the world as we encounter it. So for ancient human beings, the merger of a religion that explained both the natural world and the social world seemed to make sense. That what we experience as human beings was in fact in line not only with one another, but in line with the stars, in line with the universe. And so religion has traditionally explained both the natural world and the social world. And we used words that we call religion to explain and predict who was what and what God was to us. This way of doing religion had meaning up until about 1500 of the Common Era, up until about the Enlightenment and the real divergence of science from religion. And so it then began to beg the question, can religion be sustained when it fails to adequately explain and predict the world as we encounter it? Can we reformulate our language? Can we restructure our religion in a way that allows it to continue to be meaningful for us? And as we start to manipulate the language of our religion, we begin to realize that, in fact, the language of our religion did not fall out of the sky, but was first uttered by our own human lips. It begs the question, do we use words to construct or manufacture not only our concept of God, but the reality of God? Cupid continues, the paradox has always been admitted, for it was human beings themselves who built the city, constructed the temple, carved the image of the god, established the cult, and then promptly declared on the contrary that it was the God who did it all. Thus, religious ideology tacitly admits the paradox by going to such great lengths in its efforts to conceal its truth. People were quite determined to hide the fact that they had made it all, by declaring retroactively that the God had done it. This truth, that human beings made the city, built the temple, carved the image, and wrote the words that were revealed from the mouth of that wood, stone, and bejeweled idol, this truth hides in plain sight the very beginning of this tradition in which we now stand. Genesis 1:26. God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness." So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. You know, it's kind of like walking through a carnival house of mirrors. One has to touch your own face to discern the real image from that reflected in the mirror. We spoke those words. We human beings crafted those words that declared that God had created us. Let's look at Jesus. Jesus is another word construction. In Christian thought, Cupid says, God's eternal word does actually become a person, a human living in time, begotten in God's heart from all eternity. He is sent forth into the world to live, or according to Luke, to eat and drink and be merry, to live and die like an animal among human beings. The Word of God incarnate then gets turned back into words. So Jesus comes and lives among us as human beings, lives, eats, and drinks, and is merry, enjoys his toil, dies, and then we take the idea of Jesus and turn it back into words that we call the gospel. So a message became an eternal spirit, who became a human being, who became a text, which in turn is symbolically a person again. I have never read a better explanation of Jesus' resurrection anywhere.